Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Today, I'm happy to welcome you to another EUDF LinkedIn Live session on a very intriguing topic, I must say. We will be talking today about the market-based dynamics approach as well as the micro-enterprise approach, which are I'm not sure if they're very well discussed org design approaches, but I'm very excited because they promise for high adaptability and responsiveness. And for that, I invited today two experts in the field with really hands-on experiences. And one of them is Rachel Murch. Welcome, Rachel, from Vegas, from the US. Hey,
Hello,
Rachel.
good morning.
Hey, good morning.
Good morning for me. Good evening for
Oh,
you.
yes, that's right. So Rachel is a principal org development advisor at the Monac Group. Did I say it right?
That's pretty close. Yes.
Yes, close enough. And Rachel also almost was for a decade roughly at Zappos and experimented with a lot of approaches. And then we also have Parag. Hello, Parag. Welcome.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Monique, good evening.
Hi, Parag.
Hi, Rachel.
Great having you here. So Parag is a senior organizational change and innovation practice lead at Sprint Reply in the UK and has quite some experience in the field of micro enterprise design. So I'm very happy to have you two here today. And I would like to start the session off with have you two introduce yourself a little bit more than just the title. And I'd like to start with you, Rachel. So who are you and what's you? Where are you coming from?
That's a deep question. Who
I
am
know.
I? So hi, everyone. I work mostly in organizational development, organizational design space. My history and background kind of started in working in system implementations and in the technology organization at some very traditional organizations, and then moved into a much more progressive, innovative company called Zappos.com. You may have heard of it. And I spent time there for about a decade. Wow. And kind of evolved from working in just technology and then moved more into the organizational, level and change and development and experiments as it relates to what they might describe as managerial science with holacracy, and then evolved from there to introduce a market-based way of organizing and operating the organization. Since 2020, I've been out as an independent consultant with my business partner, with the Monac Group, and we recently also started a software company to support, I'll say, new ways of organizing and operating using role-based work.
Thank you so much, Rachel. It's really great having you here. Parag, please introduce yourself.
So I'm a business manager at Sprint Reply. Sprint Reply is based in the UK, and we are part of a company called Reply, which is based in Italy. And Reply as a group is what we call a network of organizations or other micro or even small and medium enterprises in some respects. It's a global organization, 15,000 plus employees in over 30, 35 different countries. So it's quite global, as you can imagine. But within that, we have a very sort of unique structure and a unique operating models, which I will discuss more as we run through the session. My particular role is focus on organizational change. I do a lot of innovation work, as well as a lot of operating model design. And prior to Sprint Reply, I've spent years in operations, a decade in that. Then I moved into organizational change, operating model design, process improvement work, did a lot of work in startups, and sort of industry background and experience. I've done range of industries: retail, hospitality, travel and leisure, as well as startups, automobile industry, public sector. all sorts of shapes and size of enterprises, from small, medium startups to large multinational global. So that's kind of my potted history. And from a micro enterprises perspective, it's I would say a different and a unique take on how a consultancy is run. So for everybody's benefit, Reply is a digital and technology consulting company, but organized in a very unique way, where it's organized around vertical markets or technology specialisms. So that's how these micro enterprises are formed, and we are network within a network. But I'll tell you more about that as we progress.
Cool. Thank you so much, Parag. So yeah, I think it sounds like a very intriguing session today. And I also would like to invite our audience, if there are any questions, please just pop them in the comments and Milena will pull them up and we can hopefully answer them or explore together. So looking at our topic today, you already touched it a little bit, you two. And I would like to ask Rachel now, so what is actually market-based dynamics? Like, if we talk about that. And, you know, I think people heard potentially about Run and Hay or the hire model. So if that makes it easier to compare or not, please feel free.
Okay, awesome. So market-based dynamics is actually a term that we use to describe kind of the evolution away from using a holacratic operating model and way of working. And what we did was we kind of tried to help teams operate a little bit more like independent or small businesses. I know there's also some language, Parag, you even talk about this, you know, micro enterprises. You mentioned the Rend and the He method for hire, Tine. I think we were not inspired by that model at the time. We did find out about it as we started to do it, and there's a lot of similarities, such as organizing kind of like the basic functions of the operation. So HR, legal, you know, basically these teams that can operate like shared services to provide their services to every team within the organization. Those teams also had their own P&L. So from a budgeting perspective, I would say that was the biggest change or shift from like a traditional way of organizing and operating a company. We called it customer generated budgeting, where teams were actually getting their budget, or what we described as revenue, from other teams inside the organization, and then also providing an opportunity for them to generate revenue and collect from customers who are outside of the organization. So that's where we introduce that kind of market-based way of working, where instead of like a top-down, money starts at the top and then everybody decides, how much money do you need? And it kind of goes throughout the organization. It was actually a much more networked way of really generating revenue. And then also teams were charged with, you know, their actual costs of operating as well, give them a lot more flexibility and opportunity to kind of take their team or their small business in the direction that they wanted to, instead of it just being like a traditional stagnant, like steady state. This is a team, this is what we do, this is what our budget is year after year, might grow a little bit. They could actually invest in their own team in the ways that they wanted, because they were getting money by, you know, developing these agreements or service agreements, as we describe them, between the different teams to say, we'll pay you this much to do that work, kind of thing. And it was really much more of like a value conversation, like, what will I pay? What, you know, will I charge? Here's my menu of services to say, this is what it costs to, you know, for my team or our team to do the work that we do. That's a really high level overview.
Well,
Happy to answer questions.
We will get into it, right? Because I have a ton of questions. But before, I would like to invite Parag also to talk about your network. I mean, network-based model, micro-enterprise model, and how it works at Reply.
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned earlier, we are over 180 different Reply network companies spread all over the world. So yes, we are typically organized in your regions like North America, we have Europe, we have UK as its own. But within those, we have different network companies, and I belong to one of those companies called Sprint. And Sprint, for example, specializes in business change, process automation work. That's kind of our core expertise with certain sectors like automotive, public services. We also do some work in retail and travel and tourism. And likewise, there are other reply network companies who specialize either geographically, so they will work, let's say, in North American markets, and that's all they do, or they specialize in a particular technology, maybe an enterprise resource planning systems or a customer relationship management software or a particular technology like AI. I mean, we also work with Gen AI, for example. That's kind of our specialism, Sprint. And like that, if you can imagine, there are these 180 different companies and they have a reply as a common corporate brand identity. That's kind of what I'm wearing. But within that, we have our specialisms. So this network works, and within that, we collaborate to deliver value to client on different projects. How it all started 20, 25 years ago, the idea was always from the founders that we need to be a different technology consulting firm that is agile, that is adaptive, that is nimble, and is responding to customer needs, is responding to market changes quite rapidly. A new technology comes out, for example, blockchain. So how do we capitalize on that? Okay, there's a new company that can start working on the concept. So we have this idea that within our organization, we also have startups. And those startups, so like Sprint Reply, as an example, was a startup 2.5 years ago. It was an idea on a brainchild of a couple of individuals who were entrepreneurial, and they said, oh, we can come up with this kind of vertical in the market. So it's exactly how a startup would go through the phase of we have an idea, let's go and see whether there is some traction or client demand for this work. Then you put a value proposition together, deliver the work, and if the traction builds, you build the organization. The so-called micro enterprise starts from that, and then it builds over the years, which is supported by Reply Group in terms of shared services like your HR, finance, facilities, offices. Those are shared, but everything else is down to the partners to run that organization. So it's pretty decentralized and
Mhm.
autonomous in that way, where whilst under the umbrella of the corporate policy and the brand and other guidelines, the network companies work independently for their vertical markets. So they have a very defined, focused value proposition for the clients they serve in those markets they serve. However, at a group level, we come together and collaborate very quickly to deliver a client project. And I can give a couple of examples how it actually operates. So we have the strength of a network, yes, yet we have the agility of a micro, or even I would say small and medium enterprise. Some of our network companies are not just micro, they are more than micro. So we can offer a very focused technology specific offering, or we can suddenly very quickly come together and create a big team that can deliver pretty complex projects.
Mhm. Cool. It does sound like a very effective way to scale an organization to me, with a very customer-driven approach, actually, right? So you would imagine, okay, how you're describing, like how you both are describing it to me, it sounds like, okay, this is actually, like very responsive, like it sounds very effective, and yet there needs to be some regulations or some agreements how these teams or people are actually operating. And Rachel also mentioned, there you had at Zappos the service agreements, for example, right? And you would ask, like, okay, how much do I pay for this service, or how much do I pay for this, or make an offer practically, right? So I can imagine this has very positive impact, but I would like to also, shed light on both sides, because it also sounds a little bit like, isn't that also distracting a little bit if people have to make these agreements, or I'm just like seeing it maybe out of a wrong lens right now. I would just like to explore with you guys.
I think there's a few things you bring up in that question. One thing is when people get hired into an organization, and Zappos was roughly 1,500 people, so not huge, but not tiny either. They didn't come in to like run their own business. They didn't come in wanting to have to like be the CEO of a small business, or even just be part of having to have these conversations or negotiate, pricing or any of that kind of stuff. And in some cases, they didn't have the skill to do that. So that was a challenge. I'll say we kind of developed some learning and development opportunities. One of them we called 48-Hour Founders. It was a 2.5-day program that was actually pretty fantastic, to help people kind of think differently and think like it's not so new and different, to be very customer focused, to think like with a product mindset, to think a little bit more entrepreneurial. And a lot of us have skills we don't even realize that we know that exist within us, because we haven't had the opportunity to like flex them. And so that, I would say, that was a big challenge. And then also competition. So Parag, I'm not sure if that's something that also exists in your organization. Obviously your organization is much more mature. We started the market-based dynamics journey in about 2017. And then 2020, everything changed. So it's like 4 years in, again, building off of a holacratic, structure. So it didn't start from nothing, but, competitive nature of teams, and like, whether it's for people or pricing or work, especially when you kind of lift that outer container of Zappos, meaning you could actually hire people outside of the organization to do work for you. You didn't necessarily have to do business with people inside. There are some constraints there, of course, but those are just a few of the challenges that we had. Also, people development, like how, normally in an organization, you like think that you go up the ladder. I think we're getting better as a society to realize like you don't have to be a manager, director, senior level executive to, be fulfilled or to make money or to add more value. But we had to kind of break that mindset as well. What does it look like to develop your skills in an organization that's much more networked?
And what was the impact then? And then Parag, the floor is yours. What was the impact on the engagement and the felt accountability?
The engagement as it relates to like doing this operating model, or?
Yes. Yeah. No, I mean, no, to engagement in terms of, okay, you are engaged in your team, you are engaged in your work and in the organization. And
so some people left. I mean, like you get the people who are like, this isn't for me, which is okay. I think, that's happens. But also I think, giving people the opportunity to do new and different things, it just looked different. So one example of something that we did was if someone wanted to kind of start up a new idea, one way to do that was to get investment from people within the organization. Another way of doing that was to get investment using the 48-Hour Founders program. And then they could actually create a new team. So there's a development opportunity as well, is like, okay, well, I want to do this thing. Nobody else really wants to do it. We actually allowed what we described as like a circle of one. So circles is kind of the organizational construct within Holacracy. We did keep that language. So a team is a circle, but we introduced the idea of like freelancers, using the circle of one language to say, okay, you could do your own thing. You cover your own cost, do your own work, engage in your own service agreements, create your own menu of services, and kind of operate independently within this organization. So that was definitely a development opportunity for people who wanted it. Or people could just say, I'm going to be part of this team. I'm going to deliver value in the following ways. I'm going to just do my job. And I'm going to let the other folks or the team lead kind of manage all the stuff I don't want to have to do. And I'm okay just being here.
So you had like massive engagement on one side, but you also had people practically saying, okay, that's not for me, which is of course also fine. I mean, yeah. No, it's really interesting. And in terms of customers, have you gotten any feedback that people thought, oh, what's going on there, or they, I don't know, felt like I don't know, the speed increased or any other changes?
I would say customer feedback was interesting. If you think about it outside of the organization, so define customer as external customer in this case, they're like, what the heck is going on there? I would also, I'd call out that Zappos is an Amazon-owned company. So, you know, they were like, what's going on? This is really interesting. Kind of want to see how that plays out. There were obviously a number of kind of, I'll say compliance things that had to be kind of worked out as it related to that. But overall, I think there were a lot of benefits. There was a lot of opportunity and benefits and interesting things going on. But it also wasn't for everybody, and that's okay. And that includes customers as well. It's like, okay, well, this is actually a little bit too complicated to do business with a bigger organization trying to do some new and different things. It's easier for me to just go get, you know, the services I need from some other independent organization that's not tied to a bigger, you know, company.
Very interesting. Parag, what are your experiences?
Yeah, I mean, to your sort of earlier question on services agreement, we work in a sort of different way where, given our market vertical focus on a market or a geography or a technology, typically a client entry is a reply network company who starts an engagement. And depending on the nature, we are always focused on delivering value to client. That's always our prime focus. And moreover, how can we do that pace? And then can we scale it up quite quickly? We offer the both, you know, rapid intervention as well as scalability. So a case, an example of a recent, or not recent, but quite some time, automaker here in UK. It started from a very simple example where they needed a CRM system to be implemented. So one of the network companies went in and they started that particular project. And soon we realized that we could add value to other client areas. And client said, look, can you help us with this? Can you help us with that? And then soon enough, we have other reply companies who specialize in those particular areas, be it a process optimization, be it change management, be it a IT sort of data related work. And then all those different reply network companies who specialize in data, in change management, in optimization, they essentially came and said, yeah, we could do this, we could do that. But the main engagement is always with, as a principal network company that starts the engagement. So that's how we channel our service agreements from a client perspective. It does come with its own challenges. Sometimes those clients who are a bit unaware of reply that we are a network, because we don't quite operate like other consultancies out there. So they get a bit, oh, there's another reply company. There's another reply company. And how many reply companies have we got? Oh, we got 180 plus all over the world. Oh, so it takes sometimes for them to realize we fundamentally operate in a very different way than another competitor who just have a unified brand identity, unified offering, unified everything, whereas we are unified, but at the same time we offer the, you know, the agility that sometimes the big brand consultancies can't, because they just can't move fast enough. So this is all from and then internally we have our own mechanisms of how revenues and costs are shared from an engagement. Different companies work it out, the partners work it out essentially, but there are some corporate guidelines we follow. And then there are complicated mechanisms in the background in terms of, you know, how do you make it work operationally from a project perspective. But then, for example, we have a unified Office 365. I mean, sounds quite simple, but that enables cross network communication and collaboration on projects rapidly. Everybody's on the same platform for certain things. So very quickly we can spin up a project team which comprises of different individuals from different network companies who are working collaboratively on a single client project. So for the client, they see one company, but behind the scenes, they could be 5 or 6 individuals from 5, 6 different companies, depending on their expertise and specialisms. So this is how we can rapidly scale a particular project, or even offer just one person if that's what the client is after. So client value is always the focus, their needs, and then we form our teams accordingly based on that. So this is kind of our operating model in a short. And very entrepreneurial in the sense we don't have separate business development teams in a consultancy. So what we sell, we deliver. So you have to have the confidence in selling a value proposition they can actually deliver. So there is no hiding from
Mm-hmm.
that. Now that also then means that certain individuals who are not up for that, they are not that maybe entrepreneurial, or they're not keen on business development, may find it difficult. But there is always room for people doing other things. But we are highly encouraged to be entrepreneurial and highly encouraged to bring in business. But that comes from an angle of, can we add value, and how
Mm-hmm.
can we add value to a client? So this is in a short how we work.
I want to ask a question, Parag, about I'll say client, generation. So did you share that? Do you share that within your different micro enterprises? So if,
Do.
can I give you business that I
Yep,
identify, and how does that work?
absolutely. So the company who shares the lead it has the principal engagement with the client, and then we, if let's say Sprint has gone in and done some work, then we share internally our service agreement that way. But yeah, this is very common. This is how we actually, this is the strength of our network. Most of our work comes through that so-called word of mouth. Internal, lead generation happens a lot. The partners who run these different companies help each other in terms of business development. Sometimes we go and co-bid for a project where 3 4 different network companies come together, but under the umbrella of Reply, and they bid for a particular project. So yeah, that is highly encouraged, and that happens well. That's how it's grown organically over the years. I mean, we are over
Um,
2 billion euro turnover organizations, so it's pretty big, as you can imagine. It's grown organically like that over the years.
I think when I listen to you both, it sounds like really it's very adult to adult approach, right? So it's pretty decentralized, but it also sounds really mature. And thinking now of the teams itself, you can have different roles within these teams, right? So not every role has to then, I don't know, negotiate with the other team, or not every role has to be like the CEO of the team. It could even be self-managed or whatever. And I find this really interesting because that brings like really the diversity of the people in there as well, and looking at cultures, I mean, I think everybody's very keen on the Zappos culture. Everybody knows about it. It's a very strong culture with a lot of diversity in it. So I could really see that supporting that. I find this really interesting. Rachel, please. You mentioned about like the constraints for the teams and the micro businesses, and I think we can. Sorry, I'm just going to throw that in here. Because I think both. Yeah.
I think that's an interesting topic that I get a lot of questions on, is like, okay, well, if you can just create, your own team, whether it's, a full, staff team with people, or if it's a team or circle of one, as we described it, what are the constraints? Like what exists to say, like, you can't do that? And I'll say the language that we used was like, how do we create this, environment where there's the minimum number of constraints to enable maximum freedom? So that was kind of like our model, like, what can we do? And so that was always what we would check on if we were implementing, some kind of constraint. And through that, we developed what we described as the triangle of accountability. Mm-hmm. So teams could essentially sell or do or provide services however they wanted, as long as it was in line with kind of, or within the container of 3 different sides. I think we have a slide to show it, if you want to show that, Milena. Is one side is it's in line with our culture and core values. So if you know anything about Zappos, 10 core values, number 1 being like deliver wow through service. We want to live and deliver wow is like our purpose. So as long as it was in line with our culture and core values was one side of the triangle. And then the other side of the triangle, kind of on the other side, was really about customer focused mindset, or like delivering the very best customer service or customer experience. So that was the other side, is like you had to be the very best at what you did. And then the third side of the triangle is what we described as like customer generated budgeting. And I kind of mentioned this, where you kind of had to basically break even on your P&L. That was the minimum. There's some complicated aspects of that, I'll be honest, in that, breaking even also built in some level of profit for every team. So without getting too complicated, let's just say break even on your P&L. So as long as you stayed within the boundaries of those three things, you could essentially do whatever you wanted. So again, culture and core values, service and experience, and then balance your P&L. So like the financial aspect of it. Usually I get a lot of questions about the financial aspect of it. But that was at least the minimum constraint structure that we use, that seemed to, I would say, work pretty well. And it was clear enough for people to go like, I get it. I can't, I could maybe, we had lots of really, really, really cool ideas. But it was also really clear what didn't fit in there if it wasn't in line mostly with the culture and core values.
Mm-hmm. I think maybe we can, if it's okay, maybe we can also share the slide later, because I'm not sure if, it's something went wrong potentially.
Oh, that's fine.
So let's share it later. I would like to also Parag, could you maybe say a little bit more about like the team roles and how capability is also built?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'll kind of touch on what Rachel said around culture and everything. One interesting thing to note is Reply, although it's a global organization, but within those networked organizations or companies, we have distinct cultures too. So you will not see homogeneity. You'll see homogeneity in terms of the brand, Reply as a group, but there are differences in how these different companies operate because, as I said earlier on, they are fairly decentralized and autonomous in terms of day-to-day working, as long as they follow certain guidelines, certain policies. So when that sort of comes in, the way teams are structured changes. So as an example, in Sprint, we do have teams which are typically based on project. As you can imagine, we are delivering projects to clients, and that can change from project to project. So I could be in two different teams at the same time because I'm working on two different client projects, or I could be just on one team. But then we have our own teams internally as well. And those teams are made up of the way we have structured our own organization around technology, around different business units, if you like. So at a typical given time, you could be in two different teams, project as well as internal. And then I could be involved in some internal initiative to build capabilities. So because the companies that grow in the network start from one person, two people having an idea, then they do something with it and it grows and it scales. People get the opportunity to contribute to business growth, not simply in terms of you bring in more business and deliver, but actually build internal capabilities. So those who have the capability or the experience, they can help with learning and development side of things, coaching, mentoring, and different companies experiment what works the best for them. So it's not a prescribed. There are some central guidelines around training, development, how the corporate does it, but each of the network companies do it in their own way that works the best for them in that particular market for that particular client. So that gives that flexibility where you run your capability development, whether it's a capability for a particular consultant who are just joining, or they are very experienced hire and they can pass on their knowledge to less experienced colleagues. All that is done within the resources of that network company, which is quite interesting. And then within that, we also allow sometimes for colleagues to move across different companies. Let's say tomorrow somebody wants to come over to us because they decide a change of career, they decide a change of industry vertical or a technology. They can go and join other network group companies because remember, these are legal entities in their own right. So it makes it for a very sort of dynamic way of working within the small, whilst it's part of a big?
I'll say I'm glad you talked about roles and teams and all of that, because another thing that comes up when I've talked to people about my experience at Zappos was like, well, that's too progressive. We can't do that. Where do we start? Like, what could we do, or what do we have the power to do? And I think that's a big reason why in my current company, the Monarch Group, we introduce role-based work as like the starting place, as like the building blocks that exist in every organization for the most part. Like, you just make implicit things explicit, which is how we describe it, is like, what role are you holding on this team, and what are the accountabilities for that role, and what's the allocation. And if you just do that, even having the conversation is really helpful. But obviously, we hope that it's documented. So you can say, Parag, you use the example of I am on this team, and I'm on this team, and I'm on this team, right? Like, you being able to make those things explicit really helps for a number of people to say, like, first of all, I'm clear on where I'm adding value and what I'm expected to do, and my team is clear on that as well. And then it also gives that development opportunity where you could spend a little bit of time doing something that's slightly outside of what your expertise is, because you're developing that capability, and having the opportunity to not take a full-time job, let's say, doing just one thing within a role-based or network or market-based organization where you're making implicit things explicit. You have the opportunity to like say, this is what I'm doing, and create opportunity for people who want to do something just a little bit different or develop new skills.
And you're kind of like regulating it in your team itself in terms of, okay, we still need to be break even, so we cannot just like, okay, we're just hiring like 15 people in our team. But
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
How does it work at Reply, Parag?
In terms of hiring?
Yeah. And maybe
So
also letting people go, because that's sometimes even more interesting.
Yeah. Hiring, I mean, it's a combination of centralized and decentralized hiring. When I say centralized, there are certain guidelines around, hiring, especially when you're hiring, you hire a lot of graduates from universities. So there's kind of a very set criteria how that happens. But at the level of different network enterprises within Reply Group, like I said earlier, the partners have that autonomy, and then we involve a lot of people. Our hiring processes, at least in Sprint, is slightly different, where there are different stages of interviews, but within those, the colleagues who are going to work with that particular individual on day-to-day basis do the first pass interviews before they then recommend whether this particular individual is good fit culturally for our company or not, before then it gets passed on to the manager or the partner, who then, and then the HR, then they have the ultimate. So we involve those individuals who have to work with that particular person on a day-to-day basis first. Quite, in a way, democratic hiring process, if you like, but of course it is within the guidelines. Everything, I think what you will realize, the theme underline is there are certain guidelines and policies to follow. As long as we work within that, we have the freedom and autonomy to run the organization, as long as it achieves a sustainable growth. That's the ultimate objective. And within that, you can experiment, you can try different things, but within the corporate, you still have some rules to follow.
Well,
autonomy without rules will be anarchy, right? So
exactly, we need some framework, I think, to feel free within, in that sense. So I know we made a lot of notes, like we had a lot of things to talk about. I'm also just like,
question to Rachel on scalability. Curious to sort of know Zappos. How did you scale, and did your model sort of change when you started from a very small startup to 1,000, 1,200, whatever it became? How did that change when you started to scale?
So I was not at Zappos in the early years, so I want to call that out. But I think, introducing, I'll say, even in 2013, when we started experimenting with holacracy, that was intended to kind of help bring the organization back to that startup mentality, and create like a more ownership mindset within people. And then obviously that evolved into the market-based system. But that was the whole idea, was, basically organizations can scale a lot easier. Markets flex with obviously, the market, and the operating the organization in a less like super rigid structure, and assuming that everyone at the top knows what's right for the organization is kind of a more of a traditional mindset. And so our mindset was actually, how do we unlock the creative genius within the organization, to identify like, where does the organization need to go? Where do we apply our, specialty or competitive advantage as it relates to providing the very best customer service, the very best experience, into wherever it needs to go. So an example of that might be like, what does a Zappos airline look like? Or what does the Zappos hotel chain look like? Or, insert word here. Zappos's like motto has always been like, we're just a customer service company that happens to sell shoes, happens to sell apparel, happens to sell bags, like whatever it is, happens to, have hotels or fly you around the world kind of thing. So that was the idea, was to actually create a much more scalable organization. I'll say, we hadn't quite gotten to the tipping point there with it in the time that I was there. And I know a lot of things have changed since COVID, at the organization. And of course, I haven't been there since then, but we hadn't quite realized the scale part of it, but all of the operating model and all of the organizational design work was intended to enable that very thing. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, and if I can add from reply perspective on scalability, it's to do with, like I said earlier on, people come up with ideas, technology has changed, something new has come, maybe there's a response from the demand from the market or a client. Either there's a spin-off that is created to experiment with that offering, or some partners will propose an idea, or even an individual, even I could propose an idea if I have a very strong case for that idea, and we have like a incubation center within our corporate group, who will then evaluate and assess that idea, and if it's got any legs, okay, let's try, let's experiment. And that's how we have grown. So you create a company, a small micro enterprise, which is testing the market, testing the value proposition. If it works, if there is demand, then you grow, you scale, and before you know it, it's spun off as a separate legal entity with its own team, partners, and so this is how it has grown and done the sort of scalability challenge in all different markets we operate, and quite rapidly we have grown in the last decade or so. Quite rapid growth. That seems to have worked, but within that, there are also ways and means of consolidating how you actually operate, because the so-called org design is never a static thing. Quite often people misunderstand. They treat it as I'll diagnose and I'll come up with an option. It doesn't work in reality. It's an ongoing endeavor. You have to keep looking at your scalability, viability from an org design perspective. Every time there is a shift, so there's always that tweaks happening all the time internally on, let's try this, that doesn't quite work, let's try something else. Some new ideas come in, new challenges, you try something here, there are unintentional consequences on the other side. So there's always an ongoing activity internally. It never stops.
Yeah, I 1,000% agree with that.
Yeah, me too. Because I mean, we want creativity and innovation, and that I think we only get through a fluid process because we want a fluid outcome, right? And it really sounds that both of your approaches are really achieving that in different industries, but maybe not, maybe so in the same. Who knows? Yeah. I would like to wrap it up here, guys. I think we're taking a lot of good information out of here, and I invite our audience also to get connected with the two of you. And yeah, I'm really excited to see where both of your journeys are going, and where we are at if we're going to be talking in a year or so. Because there's so much wisdom and so much knowledge in it, because it really feels like you're just like, you're at a speed developing, which is often not possible in more rigid organization designed organizations, right? So thank you both so much. And well, I hope that we're going to be talking and speaking soon. And I wish you a wonderful day.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having me. Yep.
All right.